we pick up season 8, we have a big two-parter. We have some big themes that we're tackling. The unrest down at the docks, the dock workers sort of trying to live life down there on their own terms. Brackenreed is left with his life hanging in the balance by some of these thugs.
When we left Brackenreed for dead at the end of season 7, the fans weren't happy.
You see Brackenreed looking a bit unsure of himself and a bit like, not a coward, but he's just questioning where he fits in the modern world with policing.
We have the suffrage movement that is taking hold with some of our central characters.
You do agree that women are deserving of the right to vote? Of course. I intend to see that women's suffrage is achieved in my lifetime. And I can't do that without people like you at my side.
The suffragette movement is something that I think Ogden's really excited about. As soon as she gets involved, slightly tentative at first, but once she has all of the information, she actually takes charge. So it's fun. I've been saying for years to the writers, when are we going to have the suffragettes on? So yeah, I'm super excited.
We're trying to address both social and technological change a little bit without losing the charm of it being an old-time period show. Murdoch is probably not as morally rigid as he was 7 years ago. That's partially because of the society he's around, but it's partially because he's been a cop for 8 years. So we've just tried to let the characters adapt slowly, I think, as normal human beings.
It's just virtually impossible to actually shoot the waterfront in Toronto. There's just too much there that's modern. At the moment, we're actually at 270 Sherman in Hamilton, one of our favorite places.
The building was originally built in 1900. It was built as the Imperial Cotton Company, and everybody remembers that. Hamilton is a steel town, and what they forget is the second industry in Hamilton was the fabric industry. And this would have been the center of the industrial area of Hamilton at the time that the Murdoch mysteries occurred, which is to say around about 1900.
The architecture of Sherman, the red brick that you can see around you is very typical of industrial Toronto. So even if it was the dockyards, they would probably look like this.
Socially, the Toronto Harbour was a fascinating place. As you moved away from Yonge Street towards the east end of the harbour, things got more and more interesting in terms of a really rough and tumble environment. And all these independent entrepreneurs coming up against some of these great big shipyard owners and the coal merchants, everyone trying to make a buck off the waterfront, no one cooperating.
What we are asking for is not scandalous. Although there are some who think our very presence here is shocking.
If you're going to talk about Murdoch mysteries and you want to revolve around the turn of the 20th century, you're going to end up at Queen's Park because a lot of key important decisions were made right here.
This is a remarkable complex within the City of Toronto, the Legislative Assembly building. It was opened in 1893. At the time this episode is being shot, this building would have only been not even 10 years old and would have been a major architectural icon of the city at the time.
Mr. Foster, I'm Margaret Hale. Could we have a word, please?
Of course, ladies. To what do I owe the pleasure?
Margaret Hale, she really existed, and she was the first woman to ever run for Ontario Parliament. And this was 15 years before women had the right to vote in Ontario. It was quite an accomplishment even to have gotten that far.
Women did come and present petitions. Of course, they couldn't enter the legislature per se, except in the visitors' gallery. So usually they asked one of the male legislators to introduce their petitions on the floor of the House.
It's super important to talk about every aspect of the history that people don't know a lot about in Canada, but this one is pretty close to my heart. I think that a lot of young people now, they skim over it in history and then that's the end of it.
I knew very, very little, but I find Murdoch is part of my education. I learned so much from the scripts, and I always find it so impressive, all the research that the writers do and how accurate it is, and we get to depict all these moments in history and Canadian history that are so awesome.
I think it's very important for people today to know that the vote was not just given. In fact, it came as a result of several decades of very hard work and sacrifice on the part of many women and men in order for women to get this most basic right of citizenship.
My daughter, she was here during the provincial election, and I told her, okay, we're going at this time of the day, we're going to vote. She said, I don't really feel like voting. I said, what? You have to vote. You have no idea what women went through in order for you to be able to vote. So she voted.
One of the two big sequences in this episode is this huge fight scene where the constables come down to the dockyards and face off with the dockers. George?
Let's stand aside.
When I first read the script, I did think, oh my God, because that's a huge thing to do and we're always pressed for time. It's actually something I storyboarded and shot listed and refined and refined and refined. And a big part of that, of course, is our stunts coordinator, Darren Marsman. He's great at getting actors and stunt people comfortable with all those beats, and it ends up looking really real.
It's kind of funny because the cops are sort of normal-sized guys, but all the people they brought in to be the dock workers are these, like, 6-7 foot giant burly guys. Yannick squares off with a guy who's like 7'2". It's hilarious.
It's fun to get a bit of physical. It's the stuff that you grow up wanting to be in showbiz for. At the end of the first episode of the two-parter, we've got Brackenreed possibly taking the law into his own hands and straightening things out down by the docks, and Julia in jail. Suffrage movement is a big deal, and it's a theme that we're going to certainly explore a lot in this season because it's a very real thing, and it certainly was at the forefront of news and activity at that time.
Excuse us? May we help you, madam?
Yes, Your Honor. May I speak?
This has been an unusual enough day in court already, so I don't see why not.
My name is Clara Brett Martin. I am standing with the Law Society of Upper Canada.
Clara Brett Martin is very well known in Canadian women's history because she became the first woman barrister in the British Empire, and she couldn't get into law school. So Dr. Emily Stowe and the Dominion Women's Enfranchisement Association took up her cause, and they pressured Oliver Mowat. He was the Premier and the Attorney General, so he had a special act of the provincial parliament which allowed women to study law first, but then he had to pass another act after she graduated in order to get the Bar Association to allow her to be called to the bar. So she was actually called to the bar in 1897.
Once I started delving into this and like doing more research for myself, I was like, this is crazy, and I take for granted the position that I'm in as a woman now in 2014 and all the women that came before me to put that in place.
Toronto's port was pretty significant in the early 1900s. There were boat clubs, there were ferry lines, there were coal yards, there's a big steel shipbuilding yard, and all these small finger piers trying to pull in general cargo off the wooden ships, the schooners, as well as the steamers that were running into Toronto Harbor. What's remarkable is how we've completely erased the landscape of 100 years ago. First off, it was about 1,200 feet further north. It's been lake-filled in. What we have is a real emphasis on housing, on retail, on recreation. So it's much more of a people place. That rough and tumble character is completely subsided.
Right now we're shooting at Sherman, which is a 19th century industrial complex in Hamilton. And even though the episode's called On the Waterfront, there's no water to be seen anywhere here.
There wasn't anything that was appropriate to the turn of the century on the real harbour front in Toronto or anywhere else that we could realistically shoot. So it fell to us to turn this location into a harbourfront pier that could realistically look like it was turn of the century Toronto. There was a series of shots that we did sort of in what we called Merchant's Alley, and the idea was that this would be located on the pier, at the end of which would be dockside with Toronto's harbour visible beyond. So we placed a large green screen at the end of the alley, and we had all of the people walking around in the alley. For each of those shots, we would remove the green screen and separate our foreground action from the background, and then go about creating a realistic-looking harbor. We used some footage that we had shot previously for the water itself, and then we went through a process of adding Toronto Island in the background, a lot of water traffic, ships and boats, and then we finished that off with some seagulls that make it look all the more like a pier in Toronto Harbor. We relied then also on a lot of historically sourced photographs of what Toronto Harbour would have looked like at the time, at the turn of the century, in order to rebuild a conceivable view. There's a crew of compositors who are the last step. They take all of the imagery that's been created, put it together, and try and make it look as blended and as realistic as possible, as though a camera had been there in 1902 doing real photography of the Toronto docklands.
Down at the bottom of Cherry Beach, renowned, infamous Cherry Beach. Way back in the day, if you were on the Cherry Beach Express, it meant the cops were taking you down to the water to lay a beating on you, which is exactly what happens at this point in our episode.
With Murdoch Mysteries, what makes a location good is that it's not polluted with 21st century architecture. That's the key element in doing any location shooting on Murdoch Mysteries. And Cherry Beach, obviously, we get to see Lake Ontario. We get to see snippets of Toronto Island from there.
Being at the east end of the city, out by the beach, looking back at downtown like we are now, it's the best. I grew up in the beach area for a while and used to head down and look at the sun coming down. It was great.
My favorite place in Toronto is Cherry Beach, which have these wonderful parties all through the summertime.
I used to work on the island, at Ward's Island in Toronto, and I love the beach there. That was a great place to just go sit and be by the water.
The waterfront features prominently in this two-part episode. It's almost a character, if you will. What brought all of these Great Lakes cities to prominence was the ease of shipping and moving goods, so it's really an important story to tell. This is definitely the biggest episode I've directed. We've got shootout, we've got a train, we've got, you name it, there's so much going on, and it's all on the road, so it's a lot to wrap your head around.
The inspiration for the story, we have to give a degree of credit to Thomas Craig, our wonderful actor that plays Inspector Brackenreid, because year after year he would pitch for us to come up with a Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid story. And that dovetailed really well with a Bat Masterson story. And Bat was an infamous lawman who sort of tamed the West and then became a bit washed up as a lawman and turned to sports writing.
I once sat across from Butch Cassidy at a card table in Hot Springs, Montana. I'll bet I am the only man in this city to say I've looked him in the eye.
And how long ago was that?
A number of years.
Whenever there's a famous character passes through Station House number 4, I think Brackenreid he gets like a little fan. And he sees Bat as like the real deal from the Wild West.
I had done some research on who he was, this lawman, the Butch and Sundance story. I remember him as sort of a brash, America, baby. He's this force. So there's this largeness to him and brashness to him. He's a lawman that I think is frustrated because he's not doing what he feels he should be anymore or what he was best at.
Steven is terrific. What a bonus. The guy is so much better than I even envisioned for that character. I had him a little bit more stoic and a little bit more period accurate, but I like what Steven's doing so much more, and we're just having a blast. I mean, he's really bringing him to life.
Today, we're going to have a couple of mini high falls. The first one is the fellow that will come out of that big hole, and he'll come out backwards, and then he'll fall on that supposedly bale of hay, but underneath that bale of hay, it's movie magic. We have boxes and mats underneath there so he can land safely. We work it through a little bit at first with some blocking and walk it through. Because the stunt performer's coming out backwards, he's basically going to a blind target. He knows the target's there where he's got to land, but sometimes you might throw yourself off a little bit, so you won't come out totally straight. So what we do is we make sure that the landing zone will accommodate for that. And the other one, there's two guys coming out through the wall. So you got to make sure the guys are in sync to make sure that they know both what they're going to do, even though they have to come out there looking like they're totally askew.
And 3, 2, 1, action! Cut!
Guys?
That was really cool.
We only did that take once, and it was fabulous. It was fantastic.
We got to shoot in Black Creek Pioneer Village yesterday. It's really a terrific spot because it's got lots of room for us to shoot, lots of old outbuildings that are actually period authentic, and we have this beautiful barn, so we're going to have the big shootout, the big takedown.
The barn actually is where the whole thing started. In 1954, the barn was bought by the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. In 1957, they opened what they called the Edgeley Pioneer Museum here. We have about 40 buildings. Many of those buildings are staffed with costumed interpreters who interpret trades and various roles of the 19th century. It represents a crossroads village in Ontario in the year 1867. The barn itself is quite unique. It's one of the oldest barns left standing in Canada. It was built in 1809. People may recognize it because it gets used in a lot of different film shoots.
Reach for the sky. Oh, dear Lord, please don't shoot!
Here we are in Tottenham, Ontario, the South Simcoe Railway. So we've got a big, beautiful train. Just snapped our fingers and got our train, no problem.
Well, Tottenham is about 40 miles north of Toronto. We operate a tourist train here and entertain probably 25,000, 30,000 people a year. They come to Tottenham to ride just a little bit of history. This particular locomotive is 131 years old. It was built for the CPR in 1883. It actually was indirectly involved in the construction of the railway across Canada.
Isn't that amazing? It's kind of hard to feel manly when you're six-shooter and your Western show and somebody's powder puffing you. Juggling, directing, and acting on this one. Basically, I got to keep my running shoes on all day, and I got to run back and forth between actually talking and saying the line and being all serious like Murdoch, and then running backwards and going, guys, we didn't get what we needed. It's a little bit hectic. It's fun, and the day goes by super fast, but it is a little tiring. Can we move that train, please? Watch this. No. Okay, I gotta go. So here we are, 8 seasons in, and Julia and William have just tied the knot.
Oh my God, I'm married!
After 7 seasons, it was a long enough courtship. I thought to try and keep the show fresh, it would be interesting to see William and Julia embark on the second chapter of their lives.
Having to go 8 seasons, really, and play that dynamic of, oh, I want them, and do they, and pull them apart. That in itself has been a journey. So to see this, it's a wedding that almost doesn't happen.
I feel mostly very excited for the fans because we hear what they're saying. We hear what you're saying. We just need it so badly. Give it to us. Give it to us. So we're giving it to you.
Of course, there's bad guys, and we can't let a wedding interfere with catching the bad guys.
Men and of angels, but have not love. I am anointing God.
Why was Wainwright wearing Thompson's ring the night the hotel clerk first saw him?
He's trying to impersonate him, I suppose.
The challenge in bringing them together was how to do it in such a way that we didn't over-romanticize it and see the true romance that lies between them and what really bonds them, which of course is their love of solving crime. And that trumps their desire to get married in the traditional way.
Sir, we have no time to waste. They're getting away. I don't bloody care. You're not leaving until you're officially married. Sir, I said... Get married.
It's been a long time coming.
I think Dr. Grace is really excited and relieved for them both that they finally get to be together because she's seen them go through a lot and been stopped.
I think that we'll be able to get more playful because we don't have the angst of will it, won't it, what's going to happen.
Marriage changes everything. They'll be more relaxed.
I think Brackenreid's been wanting them to get married for quite a while. He understands how they feel about one another and he's quite glad. And obviously it'll focus Murdoch and other matters, like crime fighting.
I think Henry Higgins is pretty glad that it's happening because I think there's been a bit of a pool around the boys at the office as to whether or not this was actually ever going to happen. I'm imagining he's raking in the dough right now.
It's especially exciting today to be here actually in this gorgeous spot, and it's a gorgeous day and it's a gorgeous wedding.
We are in the Metropolitan United Church in downtown Toronto at Queen and Church. One of the things that we really wanted was an older period looking church with a center aisle.
We wanted to get William and Julia married in a proper church, a church with some scope, some stature. And there's a great sort of practical location because there's large church grounds outside that we can actually film the reception afterwards. Aesthetically, it works for our show, obviously, and practically, it works for our show.
I actually go through a whole process of looking at real period photographs of weddings. There's lots of ideas out there, but they have to work for the actress that you're actually dressing and for the character. This is just the skirt, and then the train is going to be separate, so it'll be much longer.
Oh, right.
I do a whole actual series of drawings, and then from that, I bought all the fabric, all the lace, and all the antique pieces that need to go onto it. But then there's the actual building of it to make it look like it's of the period, so that it actually stands the way it needs to stand, the way it fits the body.
I'd like the fans to know that the ad bum. It's not my bum that is this big. For some reason, big bumps were the way to go.
You start from the inside out, so that you're building layers underneath to create the shape first, and then you put your costume on top of all of that. So it's like a bit of working in reverse, really, to come up with the final look, to actually make the costume look the way it needs to for the period. We have a whole staff of sewers and cutters and builders, but we're also working on the episode as well, so it's not like we're working specifically just on the dress. The actual wedding dress is being made out of a silk charmeuse, and it's being backed with a cotton and linen backing to make the actual skirt sit out properly at the bottom, so it trains beautifully.
Well, I think it's glorious. I mean, it's very Victorian, so it doesn't fulfill our modern expectations of a wedding dress at all, but it is very, very true to the time. It's very modest dress. The veil is like extraordinary. The veil comes all the way down to my knees at the front and another 15 feet behind me.
All brides are beautiful. It's mainly what's going on in their face and their emotions on the day and the people around them. I think the dresses look pretty good though. Here we are in beautiful downtown Cambridge. We love coming here. A lot of historical features. People like having us here. We have this great sort of downtown area to shoot in.
The architecture is Scottish. It goes back to the Scottish settlers, and the old city hall and all of the buildings in the downtown and core areas have that kind of flavor to them. And what we have done, unlike a lot of municipalities, is we've protected and we are reusing the buildings, and we're incorporating them into the future of what we're doing. Cambridge is a very special city. It's 3 former communities that have been amalgamated together. It has 3 core areas, so you don't get a sense of big city, you get a sense of small town. And we have one of the most beautiful urban settings in Ontario with the Grand River and the Speed River, which connects the 3 former communities.
To the newlywed couple, I would say have a sense of humor, because that will get you through the tough times.
Try to keep things exciting and fresh in the bedroom. You can pick up a copy of Cosmo in any corner store.
Communicate. Never like hold it in. Just always say what you're thinking or feeling, because it handles it way quicker than building up any resentment.
Margaret would probably say that the key to any relationship is patience and understanding of your husband.
I'd make a toast to all the characters who are not here, like Julia's sister, Murdoch's brother, Murdoch's dad.
I think I would say, Murdoch, watch out, because I think you've taken on quite a force in Julia. And Julia, you've got quite a catch. He's an amazing man.
Hello? Reservation for Murdoch, please.
Mr. and Mrs. Murdoch.
Actually, I'm Mr. Murdoch.
Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Murdoch.
Murdoch and Ogden's honeymoon is something that we were excited to deal with in light of them getting married, and it was just a matter of figuring out something that would be fun for them to do in another place. So we thought New York was exactly where they would go.
Honeymoons had originated as family events. By this era, 1902, it would be just the wedding couple who went on the honeymoon. But it would probably be something like a night in a hotel or a weekend in a hotel. It might be, for example, Niagara Falls, which was already famous by 1902 as a honeymooning place.
Seems it's time to retire to the bedroom, Detective.
Indeed it does, Doctor.
Niagara Falls is typically the honeymoon capital of Canada, and people still do honeymoon there. With Niagara Falls, there was that escapism, and I think we still have that happening now. You have the romance of the falls. You can couple it with an amazing escape to Niagara on the Lake, which is wine country. So you can get a little bit of glitz and glamour with Niagara Falls, and you can have some rest and relaxation in Niagara on the Lake. So it gives you that option where you're kind of close to lots of things, and it's really not that far from home for lots of people in Southern Ontario particularly.
Cars have arrived. Yeah, it's really fun.
Ever since a few years ago when they did an episode featuring Ford and James Pendrick inventing an electric car, we felt like it was time to really do a story about cars, about the people who loved them and advocated for them at the time, and about the crazy things that might happen when people were unfamiliar with them.
In Toronto around 1902, automobiles weren't particularly common, but if you flip through newspapers like the Globe and the Star during 1902, you'll see an increasing amount of car advertisements. There was a Toronto Automobile Club that was formed as early as 1901. Basically, they were a bunch of car enthusiasts who would get together and go for drives, usually leaving from Queen's Park on a Saturday afternoon. Perhaps the key member of the Toronto Automobile Club was Dr. Perry Doolittle, reputedly the first man in Canada to buy a used car back in 1899. Doolittle was also credited as being the man who came up with the idea of the Trans-Canada Highway.
If every man has a motor car, the streets will be overwhelmed.
Then we'll build more streets, all interconnected with a single roadway that reaches from coast to coast.
Now that's an idea. What a journey that would be.
It would take forever.
What would you call it?
The Transverse Continental Motorcar Thoroughfare.
It's a bit of a mouthful. Maybe just the Trans-Canada.
No, that's a stupid name, George.
When I read the car episodes before, I was like, oh, I'll probably never really get to do that. So I'm really happy that they threw Dr. Grace in there, and she loves it. She's a little daredevil. You have like neutral, and then when you want to rev it up, you got to pull back, and then when it's ready to go and you hear it going over, then you push all the way forward, and then it'll go, and then you just keep your foot on the gas and kind of listen. There can't be much to it.
Watching Georgina drive that old car today was hilarious. I really enjoyed that. Seeing her with her bonnet and sort of scarfular thing tying the bonnet in the old car.
Yeah,
and kicking my ass. I think that their car was much faster than ours.
Piston hasn't been running for probably about maybe 20 years. There's accidentally water got left in it and it froze the cylinder head, so we had to pull that off and repair it. But the rest of it was still okay. We just put a gas and oil in it and check and make sure it's got some spark, and then away it went. They're fairly simple. There's not too much that can go wrong with them. As long as there's gas and spark and compression, they'll start.
Very difficult to accelerate on any kind of incline. Not a whole lot of mustard on those cars. The best comparison is it's kind of like driving a lawnmower. Just the fact of chasing each other in these cars at all is sort of absurd.
This is called a process trailer. It's a very low profile trailer. If you put a car or anything on it, it doesn't look like it's really elevated above the road. And the other nice thing about it, it's very wide, legally wide, like a semi. So basically you can get the camera in the front and you can get the camera at the side at the same time. For all the close-ups of the actors, now they don't have to concentrate on actually physically driving the car.
It makes it way less complicated. I've done driving scenes before where I had to actually be in the car. You're kind of so aware of driving and speaking that you get a bit nervous, so it's kind of nice to just be on the rig. We're carrying too much weight.
Jackson, you're slowing us down. Well, jump off, man.
We don't get to work with Georgina very often, just on scenes here and there. So it's nice to spend a few days with her and actually do a few scenes. Got quite some big scenes.
I've always really liked the chemistry between Breckenridge and Grace when we have had to do scenes together. It's very playful, and it's great to work with Tommy. Like, I think he's a fabulous actor. It was very chitty chitty bang bang.
I don't have any interest in cars whatsoever. I do own a car. I guess me from A to B, to the shops, kids, that's it. I'm not like Johnny Harris. Johnny Harris makes love to his cars.
I'm a bit of a motorhead. I've always been into cars and motorbikes. I got a 98 Corvette, a couple of motorbikes, and a Jeep that I keep back in Newfoundland.
I've never bought a car, but I'm going to buy a car soon. I do like the old kind of classic looking cars, like a Beetle or a Mini. I like the Fiats, very European cars. But yeah, she's all right. Rio. We have to name her. Betty, I think her name is. Red Betty.
Dundas is just a little west of Hamilton. It's really part of Hamilton, but it is a town unto itself. There are so many good features about Dundas. It's a great place to live. It's a wonderful place to shop. There are great studio tours, a fantastic art school, that's been here for 50 years. Great food, great restaurants, great small independent food stores. Just even to walk up and down the main street is fantastic.
All right, lads, on we go. Ontario is ours for the discovery.
Murdoch Appreciation Society is an homage to our terrific fans. People are passionate about it, so we wanted to acknowledge that in one of our episodes.
I think it's very fitting to do an episode about fandom. It's fun, so it's a brilliant idea.
We wanted to watch you as you work, Detective Murdoch.
Watch me work. Why?
Well, to appreciate you.
One of the biggest fangirls that I know, and I know a lot about fandom because of my daughter, Michaela. She's playing a very funny Murdoch fan, actually.
It's fun because I get to play with my dad. All my scenes are with him, so it's kind of funny to be playing someone completely different. He's playing someone completely different, but we're supposed to have a relationship, and we're trying not to be father and daughter. It's interesting. I'm supposed to be his biggest fan and be obsessed with him, and I'm like, it's Dad.
Just people that have traveled as far as Australia and Belgium and San Jose and Paris and Amsterdam and Tilsonburg to come to Toronto, get a look at the set, some of the people, and what we do week to week.
We have amazing fans who are fanatical, as they say, which, we appreciate because that's what keeps the show in the air.
And I think there are some elements of certain fans that we know quite well that are in the script.
I'm a fan of other TV series, but nothing like I am for Murdoch Mysteries.
I just one day was flicking through 13th Street channel and I saw Yannick's face and I thought, oh, this looks good.
I love Brackenreed. He's my favorite actor. I like the fact he's a bit of a tough guy.
George has just got such a quirky, lighthearted feel. He makes the show have balance.
I really like Julia because I'm a nurse, so being in the medical field, I like how she made such great strides being a woman in the time.
I think it's just like a feel-good show, to be honest. The whole cast seemed like a really close-knit group and you care about them.
I like how it's based on the history and how they're pretty much inventing things that we use in an everyday life, like the telephone.
I love the Victorian era. I just love it, and how we're going into the Edwardian, and the costumes are actually following that.
Women particularly have come to me, and younger girls, and said what an inspiration they find her as a character.
People seem to like the character, When I was on Coronation Street, people didn't like my character and I got killed off. But people seem to like me and I'm still here, season 8.
Well, I don't want to sell myself short, but I think being the likable sidekick, that's a pretty surefire way to get the approval of your fans. Batman is cool, but everybody loves Robin. It's easy to love him.
I think having another female character was really nice for the female fans. She's also just one of the characters that's just a little more lively and really thinks outside the box for that time period.
I think for us to meet the fans, meet the people that are watching and supporting our show around the globe, it's pretty cool to sort of thank them, even if it's just saying hi, nice to meet you, and saying thanks for watching the show. And it's something that I appreciate being able to do.
In coming up with the story, because one of the characters was a bookstore owner, I decided to use a book. In sourcing books that were published in 1902, I found that Mark Twain wrote a book, a novella called A Double-Barreled Detective Story. It had a great reference to the fact that there were 2 stories in the episode.
So you do have a copy?
I actually found things from the book itself. So Murdoch puts on his blackboard clues from those pages. So if you went to page 39 in the book, you would find those words, same with each of those. And I have to say, as a writer on this series, it's something I love to do.
We're in another Hamilton gem here today, Gage Park. Never been here before, but my God, you could be anywhere in the world. It's absolutely beautiful.
We're standing in beautiful Gage Park right now, located in Hamilton's East End. It's one of Hamilton's best-known, well-loved parks, opened in 1922. We've got long-going tennis clubs here, tropical greenhouses, great walking paths and mature trees. The land itself was owned originally by a prominent Hamilton lawyer, Robert Russell Gage. It was then sold to the city and opened officially as a park in 1922. The park was named after the family, in large part thanks to large donations that went to help build this gorgeous fountain behind us. The landmark piece of the park, designed by John Lyle, architect responsible for Union Station in Toronto as well.
So, Doctor, what do you make of the detective's admirers?
It seems the notion of ardent followers is something of a modern phenomenon.
A byproduct of his successes, I suppose.
Have I been a fan? Yeah, you know, I remember always a big fan of the Tragically Hip, and ended up with a backstage pass somehow and met Gord Downey and sort of fumbled my words.
Kind of obsessed with the Vampire Diaries. That is a really guilty pleasure that I have.
When I was really little, I was a bit crazy about Michael Jackson. Like a bit crazy about Michael Jackson. I do remember that I had posters on my ceiling.
I'm a fan of a certain football team in England, so I understand fandom to a certain extent. It's an interesting concept, being a fan of something.
I'm like the fangirl. I love, right now it's currently like One Direction.
I have things that I grew up with that just blew my mind. You know, I wanted to be Batman. I wanted to be Han Solo. I like all of these things. There's a reason why I ended up in showbiz. I was a huge fan.
All right. Everybody smile.
Up until this point in the season, we've been sort of traveling far and wide and building things and seeing all sorts of incredible stuff. What Lies Buried is a very contained episode.
The mandate was to come up with a show that could be contained within the station, so we didn't have to go outside, we didn't have to go to locations. We actually took a walk through the station. We were trying to come up with this idea. We were sort of staring at the ground, and one of us said, what would happen if there was a body lying underneath there? And everything basically developed from that. We call these bottle episodes, because you're basically writing a play. It has to be kind of as dense as a play, and the mystery has to be embedded in the dialogue in a way that it doesn't if you are filming all over the place with multiple locations.
And that takes a lot of the sort of focus and energy and hard work off of all of the other departments' shoulders and puts it straight onto mine, because I have to rattle off. For instance, on Monday, I did 15.5 pages of dialogue in one room. Basically, that's when I earned my money.
One of the things that I liked about it was the idea of bringing back Chief Constable Giles. We thought it would be wonderful if there could be a moment where there's a confrontation between Giles and Murdoch, going back to their first confrontation, which was about Constance Gardner.
So it's the truth you want? Forgive me, I thought it was my conviction. We're neither of us stalwarts when it comes to the truth, are we, Detective?
Meaning what?
Meaning that there is a truth that lies between us that you have yet to admit to.
The entire episode is filmed in the station, Brackenby's office, Murdoch's office, the bullpen, and the interview room.
Police station in Murdoch's era. It was on the north side of today's Dundas Street, just east of Parliament. It was a combination building of police station and fire hall. Then they opened Regent Street, which is a little street that runs near Regent Park. Then they opened this one, 51 Division, in the old Consumers Gas Building, the corner of Front and Parliament. So that's the sequence of number 4, although now it's called 51 Division. As you see around us here in 51, they've very cleverly used the history of the department as part of the decor in this very industrial building. To be a constable on the Toronto Police Force in those days was a feather in your cap. They weren't paid particularly well, but nobody was in those days. $2-3 a day for payment, but of course the newspaper was a penny. There would have been something in the vicinity of 300 officers, including constables and sergeants and inspectors, and all led by one fellow.
We are standing in what we call Old Town Toronto. This is where Toronto was founded, right here on Front Street, at Front and Jarvis. Back in 1902, this truly was still pretty much the center of Toronto. The new fantastic market had just opened. It was the Eaton Centre of its day. It was one of the largest public buildings in the city. The morgue of the city stood 2 blocks from the market, and it was on Frederick Street right at the Esplanade. And down that way, down the other end of Front Street, was the Great Queen's Hotel, the real first luxury hotel we had in the city. It's where the Royal York Hotel stands today, right across from Union Station. All these warehouses along here where all would have been standing in the 19th century. The great St. James Cathedral was built in 1853. The spire was added in 1874. That would have been there. And St. Lawrence Hall on King Street, just behind me, built in 1850. It was the first real great room of Toronto where people like Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, would have spoke. So John A. Macdonald, P.T. Barnum, the great circus man from New York, he used to book all his acts in there.
This would have been
a real mixed neighborhood in the early 1900s. Some of the key kind of landmarks would have been, firstly, the massive gasworks that was located around Front Parliament Street, the 51 Division Police Headquarters and the Canadian Stage Building, as well as the Canadian Opera Company Building, which are all quite lovely old buildings, would have originally been part of this gas works. At that time, many houses and businesses would still have been lit and fueled by gas. The Distillery District would also have been a key landmark in Corktown in 1902. The breweries and distilleries would still have been major employers in the neighborhood. A couple of the oldest churches of the city are located in Corktown. Little Trinity Anglican Church is the oldest standing church in Toronto. Also, St. Paul's Basilica is a few blocks north. That church was constructed in the 1880s, and that parish is the oldest Catholic parish in the city.
Nice to see me. It's over, John. It's finally over.
We're into season 8 now, and I've been with the show from day one of shoot. I personally felt myself, that I'm sort of getting on in age here, and in reality, as a police officer constable, I would be certainly retired by now. Paul Aiken came up with a great storyline for Constable Hodge. A nice goodbye episode.
If you have a story, and it's a really good story, and that involves sacrificing one of your constables, you tend to think story first. And so Brian Callback was a victim. Mind you, he's not going to prison for long. He will probably never be a member of the police constabulary again. But I would hope that at some point, Brian Callback gets a call back.
Nothing like a hot cup of tea. Oh, you're a good man, Dodger.
This episode features not only one Thomas Alva Edison, but two. Thomas Alva Edison Jr. is featured in this story as well.
We first introduced the character of Thomas Edison when we did the filmed adventures of Detective Murdoch. And in the process of doing our research on Edison, we discovered that he had a son, Thomas Edison Jr., with whom he had a difficult relationship. And the more we looked at that relationship, the more we were interested in building an episode around it.
The man thought that he knew better than an Edison is a sham. Did you learn nothing from me, boy?
No longer in my short trousers, Father. I can make my own decisions.
Yes, and destroy the good name of Edison in the process.
Gentlemen, if I may.
The historical Edison did have very, very poor relationships with his children. To put it mildly, it's pretty fractious. Thomas Jr., who is the character that we have in this episode, did not please his father. He worked for the company, but his dad had very high standards.
There's no amount of therapy that could fix what has happened between Edison Sr. and Jr. Every scene that myself and David Storch, we're just bickering the whole time. We're never satisfied with one another, and we just can't wait to get out of the other one's life.
Edison was the original workaholic. He used to, when he got tired, push his space aside on his work table, lie on it, go to sleep, wake up, get back to work. He had a voracious appetite for knowledge. He was constantly tinkering. He was constantly trying to figure out how to make his inventions better, how to beat the competition. Really admirable in terms of his work ethic, but he also expected a lot of those who worked with him.
Look at this arm!
This device is a modern marvel. One that can complete complex tasks a cosmetic prosthetic cannot.
For this episode we have coming up, we have a prosthetic arm that's supposed to be a robotic humanoid arm. Electromechanical is how it's described in the script. It's kind of the highlight of the medical convention. Crabtree and our young lad Simon are quite taken by the fact that there is this mechanical arm that can do things, because something like this would have been very, very advanced. All of the plastic parts, which is almost all of the arm, were printed on a 3D printer. And so all of this, these inside here, there are gears. There's a giant worm gear in here. The whole arm in here is 3D printed and then covered in leather to make it look more period. Inside this, there are 6 servos, which move the fingers and the wrist. And then right inside this 3D printed box, there's another rather large servo that controls the motion of the elbow. And I can control all of this with this remote control. The advantage to having 3D printed to make props is you can actually prototype things and make them in-house. I can make a part. If it doesn't quite work, we can tweak it in the computer, print it out again.
Today we're at the historic Walper Hotel in downtown Kitchener. A lot of great stories in this place.
Walper Hotel is located at the corner of King and Queen Streets in downtown Kitchener. We've been standing on this corner since 1893, so for 121 years. Previous to this particular structure, there's been a hotel or tavern or inn of some kind on this corner since 1820. Some of the favorite guests that the Walper Hotel staff like to talk about include Eleanor Roosevelt, who is known to have enjoyed breakfast on our courtyard, which is located on the 3rd floor of the hotel. The favorite story, I guess, about Louis Armstrong is the story of him playing his trumpet off the King Street balcony. The Barristers Lounge is also famed as the location of Al Capone and the Seagram brothers meeting. So the Seagram brothers met Al Capone, who was of course known for his bootlegging. The Seagram had a distillery and supply up in Waterloo, so very nearby at that time, and that was the supply that's reputed to have been carried out of the area. Murdoch Mysteries has been filming on the 2nd floor of our hotel in the Crystal Ballroom, the Oak Lobby, the Barristers Lounge, and also the Oak Room space.
We came here for 2 reasons. The exterior of the Walper Hotel will be used throughout the year to represent the new home, the suite that Murdoch and Ogden are living in. And at the same time, we needed a room, a large ballroom type room to stage the medical emporium. The biggest thing about shooting the emporium was, I think, capturing a sort of sense of whimsy and scale. You want to show it in a way that we really see the wonderful job the art department did and try and catch a sense of wonder, especially the sense of wonder that Simon and Crabtree are seeing as they travel through the exhibit. We used a Steadicam, which allowed us to go in many directions at once and allowed us to travel freely as if you're another person experiencing the Emporium. It's really about a very big dance that we orchestrate between camera, actors, the background, the different sets, all those elements being choreographed into one large movement.
Step up, who wants one? This is sort of the early days of vaudeville, and Crabtree and Higgins are convinced that they can make a duo act.
Both been very, very excited throughout this episode. They're big comedy fans, the two of them, and they want very much to be a part of this world.
We're always looking for unique worlds that we haven't sort of explored on the show before. Given that we're 8 seasons in, and vaudeville was sort of the preeminent form of entertainment of the era, it's kind of amazing that we had not thought of doing it up to this point.
This is blessed. You have no idea. The comedy talent that they picked for this, the casting went above and beyond. We've got some of the funniest people in the country working on this episode. Brian Belleville is here, Ron Peterson, got Justin Landry, Winston Spear is in this episode, plus you got Johnny Harris. And these guys in vaudeville, and they did everything. So the juggling and the acrobats and the impressions and the dancing and the this and the that, and then the jokes as well. They were true entertainers, and I think we get a glimpse of that in this episode.
I guess what made vaudeville different was it was cheap. And it was everywhere. It was the biggest form of entertainment in the early 1900s. It was the entertainment of the time. There was nothing came close to it. There was lots of acts. I mean, you name it. You could see everything. You could see a big 7-person tumbling act, and then next would be a lady singer. Then it would be a comedy animal act, like the mules or chickens playing instruments or cat orchestra or something. There was cheap acts, which were horrible acts, so they called them chasers. And these theaters that did 3 or 4 shows a day had to empty out the seat for more customers, so they'd put the chaser on and it'd be a terrible act and people would leave, right?
I came to the Scottish Rite because the show we're doing is about vaudeville, and vaudeville just after the turn of the century. So we needed a theater that looked like it was period appropriate, and the Scottish Rite has this amazing room in it.
In terms of the history of Hamilton, this is a very, very historic property. The Mills family, which is a very prominent family in the history of Hamilton, purchased the property, had it until the 1870s, and it was purchased by one George Elias Tuckett, who was a tobacco merchant. This house was built in 1895. The Scottish Rite purchased it in 1920. You're shooting in what we call the cathedral, but it's really just a theater in the round. Beautiful facility, has a large Casavan pipe organ in it. People are welcome to come in and have a look at the building because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm biased, but it's a real jewel and an oasis of calm in the center of downtown Hamilton.
Almost every town had some kind of a theater where vaudeville could take place. The big ones are still there, the Olga and the Winter Garden. They were vaud houses.
We're at the mezzanine level of the Winter Garden Theatre, and the Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre Centre is the only remaining double-decker theatre that is still operating in the world today, with both theatres fully operational. The theatres are located on Yonge Street, right down at Yonge and Queen. Vaudeville was the mass entertainment of that era, and these theatres were built specifically for vaudeville. The Winter Garden Theatre was built to emulate rooftop theatres that were quite common across North America at that time. Of course, with the climate in Toronto, it needed a roof. So they covered it with leaves to give it that sense of it being a garden. It's a very palatial setting, as you'll see in the lobbies. The idea was that coming to see a show in the Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre was just as special as seeing the show itself. Because of its uniqueness, we get visitors from all over the world here. Anyone who's interested in theatre really has to come and have a look at this building.
What the hell are you doing here?
So this is our blood hit, or bullet hit. And what it is, so we have an electrical charge, a squib, which is mounted onto a brass plate. And the brass plate is affixed to a piece of cardboard. And then on top of that, we fill a condom with blood, stretch it really tight, and they're not easy to do, and sometimes they break. They break a lot. We tape it, make it really nice and firm so you can see that little bubble. And then we affix it to whatever it's going to be, whether it be the vest in this particular case, it's going to be a white t-shirt. This electrical charge is run by battery, so we will have one person on the battery, and he will coordinate the timing with the director, the actor, whoever gets shot. So when it is the right time to hit the button, they will go action, 3, 2, 1, they'll hit the button. The guy will definitely react because he's never been shot before.
Why?
There's this tremendous amount of anticipation. They rig you up and they tell you that it's going to feel like a hard slap. Yeah, it was incredible. There was that hard slap feeling. It wasn't too painful, but it's something that you can use to react off of, right? You're getting shot. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, better than a makeout scene.
The Toronto bank, I just told you, it's been robbed. Isn't that why you cursed? No, Murdoch. I cursed because I'm out of bloody scotch.
Pass.
It's kind of awful.
Unfortunately, they're both a little bit terrible.
Just for the show, I'm doing a very poor impression of Tom. I mean, if I wanted to, I could nail it. For this show, it's terrible. It's weird to see how this world has changed over the years, and then again, not so much. You know, people getting a tomato thrown. Obviously, we think that's archaic now, but I did a gig where I had a dinner roll thrown at my head one time, so some things change, but